The night my brother got engaged, my father made a toast that I still hear in my sleep. He stood at the head of the dining room table, the long oak one my grandmother left us, the one we only pulled out for Thanksgiving, and for moments my father decided were worth remembering. And he raised his glass of Scotch and looked around at everyone except me. "To Caleb," he said, his voice full and warm the way it only ever got when he was talking about my brother. "The man this family always knew he'd become." Everyone clinked glasses. My mother cried a little. My brother's fiancée, a sweet woman named Hannah, pressed her hand to her heart like she was witnessing something sacred. I was sitting 3 chairs down, still holding a fork I'd forgotten to put back on the table. I didn't cry. I didn't make a sound. I just sat there thinking about the 18-hour call I'd gotten off of 4 days earlier, the one where we'd lost a patient on the table at 2 a.m., and I'd gone back to the on-call room and cried alone into a pillow that smelled like someone else's shampoo. And I thought, I will never stop being invisible to this man. I was 31 years old. I was 2 months away from finishing my fellowship in pediatric cardiothoracic surgery, and my father had just made a toast about legacy without looking at me once. I should tell you what Caleb does, because it matters in the way that it always matters in families like mine. Caleb sells commercial real estate. He's good at it. He makes a real income, drives a nice truck, knows how to work a room at a company barbecue. My father spent 22 years in construction management and built things with his hands before his knees gave out. And in my father's mind, Caleb is the continuation of that. A man who deals in buildings. A man you can understand at a dinner table without having to explain the difference between a mitral valve and an aortic valve. I've been explaining myself my whole life. My name is Vivienne. My parents named me after my maternal great-grandmother, which should have been a sign that I was always going to be a little out of place in our family. We're from Knoxville, Tennessee, and nobody in a 10-mile radius of our house growing up was named Vivienne. I went by Viv. My father called me the complicated one when he thought I wasn't listening, and he said it the way you'd describe a piece of machinery that keeps breaking down. I was 12 when I told my parents I wanted to be a doctor. My mother smiled and said that was wonderful. My father said, "You know what that costs, right?" I said yes. He said, "You know what it takes?" I said yes. He said, "We'll see," and went back to his paper. Caleb was 17 then, a junior in high school who'd already been scouted for football. He got a partial scholarship to the University of Tennessee. My father drove him to campus himself, helped carry boxes up 3 flights of stairs, took the whole family to Calhoun's afterward for ribs and celebration. When I left for Vanderbilt 4 years later on a full academic scholarship, my father shook my hand at the door like I was a colleague leaving after a meeting. "Drive safe," he said. My mother hugged me for a long time in the driveway, long enough that I thought she might say something. She didn't. Medical school teaches you to compartmentalize. That's not in any syllabus. Nobody stands in front of an auditorium and says, "Today we'll learn to put your feelings in a box so you can keep functioning." But you learn it anyway because the alternative is falling apart every time something hard happens, and things are always hard. You learn to finish your work and then deal with the rest of it later. I got very good at that. I graduated with honors. I matched into my first choice residency at UCSF, which meant moving to San Francisco, which was about as far from Knoxville as I could get without leaving the country. My father did not come to graduation. He said the drive was too far and flights were expensive. Caleb texted me a thumbs-up emoji the day I matched. My mother called and cried. But she stayed home too. I told myself it was fine. I was busy. I was going to California. I didn't need anyone to drive 18 hours to watch me walk across the stage. I had friends who threw me a dinner. I had a residency director who told me I was one of the most technically gifted surgeons he'd seen come through. I had work. I always had work. The years in residency passed the way residency passes for everyone. Brutally, exhaustingly, with occasional moments of such pure clarity and purpose that you understand exactly why you chose this, and can't imagine having chosen anything else. I was in the OR at 5 in the morning, and the OR at 11 at night. I learned to sleep in 45-minute increments. I learned to eat standing up. I fell in love with the particular silence of a chest cavity, and the particular sound of a heart resuming after repair, that wet, stuttering catch and hold that means you bought someone more time. I called my mother every Sunday. I called my father maybe 6 times in 4 years, and 4 of those times were because someone else in the family was in crisis and I needed information. During my third year of residency, Caleb's real estate business expanded. He and a partner bought a small firm in Nashville and rebranded it. My father flew to Nashville for the ribbon cutting. I know because my mother sent me a picture. My father and Caleb in matching ties. My father grinning with his whole face in a way I'd never seen directed at me. I framed the picture in my mind and put it in the compartment with everything else. The thing about our family that you need to understand is that it was never loud. There was no screaming, no dramatic confrontation, no moments where anyone said, "We don't love you," out loud. It was quieter than that. It was the absence of things. The absence of my father at my graduation and my college orientation, and the call I made when I got into the fellowship program at Cleveland Clinic, which is one of the top pediatric cardiac surgery programs in the country. The call where he said, "That's good," and then asked if I talked to Caleb lately because Caleb was going through something. Silence is the thing that takes the longest to name. Because for years you keep telling yourself it isn't what it looks like. I named it somewhere around my 29th birthday, which I spent in the hospital because we had a 7-year-old girl who needed an emergent repair and there was no one else. I didn't mind that part. I stayed because I wanted to. But somewhere between midnight and 3 in the morning, sitting in the family waiting room with the girls' parents, watching them hold each other's hands, I thought about who would hold my hand if it were me on that table. And I realized the honest answer was, not my family. That was the first time I cried about it. Really cried, not the manageable kind, not the kind that stops when you splash cold water on your face. I cried in a supply closet off the second floor corridor for about 4 minutes, and then I washed my face and went back out and told the parents their daughter had come through beautifully. She had. She absolutely had. I finished my fellowship at 31 and accepted a position at Children's National Hospital in Washington, D.C. It was a significant appointment. The department head told me during the offer call that I was the youngest person they'd hired at that level in over a decade. I sat in my Cleveland apartment and said thank you and felt something I hadn't let myself feel in a long time. Something that took me a moment to identify as pride. I called my mother first. She was thrilled, genuinely, in the way she was always genuinely happy for me, even when she couldn't say it in front of my father. She said, "Oh, Viv, that's incredible." She said it 3 times. I could hear her smiling. I could hear her smiling. I called my father second. "DC, huh?" he said. "That's a long way." "It's a great hospital," I said. "One of the best pediatric cardiac programs in the country." "That's good," he said. "Listen, did your mother tell you about Caleb's project in Franklin? He's developing a whole mixed-use block down there. 40 units. It's really something." I said yes, I'd heard. I said congratulations to Caleb. I said I had to go. I sat with my phone in my hand for a while after that. Then I packed up my apartment and drove to Washington, D.C., and I started my life. 6 months into my new position, something happened that I didn't expect. A case came in. A 4-year-old boy, complex congenital defect, 2 previous failed interventions at other facilities. His family had traveled from Ohio. They were exhausted in the way families get exhausted when they've been fighting for a child for years and have started to lose faith that anyone can help. The mother had dark circles under her eyes and a grip on her son's hand that never loosened. I operated for 11 hours. My team was extraordinary. When I came out to the waiting room, the mother stood up and looked at me, and I could see her reading my face before I said a word, bracing herself, and I said, "He's stable. He did beautifully." And she made a sound I can't fully describe. Not quite a sob, not quite a laugh, somewhere between them. And she said, "Thank you. Thank you. We didn't know if anyone could do it." I don't cry in front of families. I've learned not to. But driving home that night, I had to pull over for a few minutes before I could see clearly enough to drive. The boy's father was a journalist. I didn't know that until 3 weeks later, when my department head called me into his office and showed me a piece that had run in the Washington Post, a personal essay about their son's journey, about the years of uncertainty, about coming to Children's National, about the surgery. He had maimed me. He had described what it felt like to watch me walk out of the OR and tell them their son was going to be okay. The piece was shared tens of thousands of times. It ran on a Tuesday morning, and by Tuesday afternoon, my phone was full of messages from colleagues, from medical school friends, from people I hadn't spoken to in years. My mother called, breathless. "Vivienne, I'm looking at this right now. Your name is in the Washington Post." "I saw it," I said. Your father saw it too, she said. I showed him. I waited. What did he say? A pause. He said it was good. He said it was good. He said it was very good. I told her I had to get back to the hospital, but something was different after that. Not in my family. That stayed the same. What changed was something inside me. Something that had been slowly shifting for years and finally, quietly, settled into place. I stopped waiting. I didn't make a dramatic decision about it, didn't write my father a letter or have a conversation I'd rehearsed. I just stopped waiting for him to see me and started living like I'd already been seen. It's a small distinction and it changes everything. The engagement party happened 8 months later. Caleb had proposed to Hannah at the end of October, and by December, my parents had organized a gathering at their house in Knoxville. Not enormous, maybe 40 people, extended family and close friends and neighbors who'd watched Caleb grow up and always adored him. My mother cooked for 2 days. She made her brisket and her potato gratin, and 3 pies. The house smelled like rosemary and something sweet when I walked in from my drive from the airport. I'd taken 2 days off to be there, which was not a small thing in my department, and I'd covered 2 colleagues' weekend calls the month before to make it happen. Nobody knew that except my scheduling coordinator. I didn't mention it. I hugged my mother in the kitchen and she held on to me for longer than usual, which I registered without asking about. I shook my father's hand in the living room. He said, "You made it." I said yes. He said, "Long drive from DC." I said I flew. He nodded and looked past me toward the door, where Caleb was just arriving with Hannah and her parents. The room shifted when Caleb walked in. It always did. He's magnetic in the way some people simply are, warm and easy, and good at making whoever he's talking to feel like the most important person in the room. I don't say that with bitterness, it's true. Caleb is genuinely likable, and the tragedy of our family isn't that he's a bad person. He's not. The tragedy is that my father made us into a competition that only one of us knew we were in. Dinner was loud and good. Hannah's mother was funny and talked about their golden retriever for most of the appetizers, and I liked her immediately. I sat between my Aunt Marlene, my mother's sister, who always made a point of asking about my work in specific detail, and a family friend named Ted who'd known my parents since before I was born. Ted asked about Washington and seemed genuinely interested in the answer. I was fine. I was having a decent time, which was more than I usually managed at family gatherings, and I'd already given myself permission to leave by 9. Then my father stood up. He didn't clink his glass. He just rose, the way he always does, the way that makes a room pay attention, because he's a large man with a certain gravity, and he waited until people quieted. He was holding a tumbler of Scotch. He looked around the table with the warm look he saves for moments he's decided are important. "I want to say something," he said, "about what it means to watch a son become a man you're proud of." He talked for about 4 minutes. He talked about Caleb's work ethic and his character and the fact that he'd found a woman worth building a life with. He talked about the Franklin development, the 40-unit project, as though it were the continuation of everything my grandfather had built. He said, "This family has always known what it stands for," and he looked at Caleb when he said it. He didn't look at me. Not once. Not a glance. Not an accidental turn of the head. I was 7 feet away, and I was not in his field of vision. I sat with my hands in my lap. Marlene beside me put her hand briefly over mine. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. When he finished and everyone clinked and the noise came back up, I picked up my wine glass and drank from it and looked at the centerpiece. White tulips, my mother's choice. And I made myself breathe slowly, and I thought, this is the last time. This is the last time I come home expecting something different. Not because I was angry, though I was, but because I was 31 years old and I had repaired the hearts of children who would grow up and have children of their own, and I had done it with my own hands, and I was finished carrying the weight of a man who could not see me. I left early the next morning, before most of the house was awake. My mother was already in the kitchen, and she made me coffee and sat across from me, and we didn't talk about dinner. We talked about Hannah and about whether Marlene's hip was healing properly and about a bookshelf my mother wanted to move but couldn't figure out the logistics of. Small, real things. At the door she hugged me again, that longer than usual hug, and she said quietly, "I'm proud of you, Vivienne." I should say it more. I said, "I know, Mom." I drove to the airport with the windows down even though it was cold because I needed the air. 7 weeks later, I was in the middle of a Tuesday when my phone lit up with a call from my department head. That was unusual. He typically emailed. I stepped out of the corridor and answered. "Have you looked at your email in the last hour?" he asked. I said no. "You need to look," he said. "But first let me tell you, the appointment has been formally approved. It's going to be announced Thursday, but I wanted you to hear it from me. You've been named the new director of pediatric cardiac surgery. You'll be the youngest director at the hospital level in this department's history." I stood in the hallway with the phone pressed to my ear and didn't say anything for a moment. "Vivienne." "I'm here," I said. "I'm here." "Thank you." "You earned it," he said. "That's all." I hung up and stood there for another moment. The hallway was ordinary, linoleum floor, fluorescent light, the sound of a cart being wheeled somewhere down the corridor. A nurse I worked with every day passed and I smiled back, and neither of us said anything. I thought about calling my mother. I would later. I thought about calling a few friends who'd been with me since the beginning. I thought about Caleb's engagement party, about white tulips and my hands in my lap, about my father's voice going warm and full when he talked about legacy. Then I put my phone in my pocket and went back to work. The announcement went out Thursday morning, hospital-wide, and by Thursday afternoon it had been picked up by 2 medical journals and 1 healthcare news outlet that apparently had more readers than I realized, because by Friday, my inbox looked like nothing I'd ever seen. Colleagues from residency, professors from medical school, a woman I'd done a summer research program with at age 19 who tracked me down through the hospital website to say congratulations. And my brother called. Caleb called Friday afternoon, which surprised me enough that I almost didn't pick up. We texted occasionally, but we hadn't had a real phone call in over a year. I answered. "Hey," he said. "I saw the thing, the announcement." "Yeah," I said. "That's Viv, that's a big deal." "It is," I said. "That us." Viv, that's a big deal." "It is," I said. A pause. "I don't think I've ever really told you," he said. And then he stopped. I waited. "I always knew you were going to do something like this," he said. "I just don't think I ever said it out loud. I should have." Another pause. "I think Dad doesn't really know how to talk about what you do because he doesn't understand it, and he doesn't want to look like he doesn't understand it. That's not an excuse. I know that's not an excuse." I sat with that for a moment. "No," I said, "it's not." "I'm sorry," Caleb said, "for my part in it, for not saying anything when I should have." I believed him. That was the thing that surprised me. I believed him without question. Because Caleb has never been cruel, just oblivious in the way that golden children often are. And there's a difference, even if the effect is sometimes the same. "Thank you," I said. "That actually matters." We talked for about 20 minutes after that, real talking, the kind we hadn't done since we were kids. He asked about the role, what it meant, what I'd be doing differently. I explained some of it. He listened. By the end, we'd made tentative plans to have dinner the next time I came south. Just the 2 of us. I don't know what that becomes. I know it's the beginning of something, which is more than I had before. My father called on Saturday morning. I was making coffee. I saw his name on the screen and I stood there for 2 full rings deciding whether to answer, and then I did, because I'm still his daughter, even if that word has never meant to him what I needed it to mean. "I saw about the appointment," he said. "Yeah," I said. A long pause. My father is not a man who apologizes. He was raised by a man who didn't apologize, in a town that considered it weakness. And at 64, he's too old and too stubborn to rewire that. I know this. I've known it for years. "That's a hell of a thing," he said finally. "Youngest one they've ever had." "Yes," I said. Another pause. "Your mother showed me the Post article, the one from last year. About the boy." "I know," I said. "She told me." "I didn't read it when she first showed me," he said. "I read it later. After." I didn't say anything. I poured my coffee. "You did good," he said. "I know I don't." He stopped, started again. "I know I'm not always good at this." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. It was, for my father, as close as he would ever come. And I was old enough and tired enough and whole enough to know that waiting for more would only diminish what he'd actually given me. "I know, Dad," I said. We talked for 8 minutes, not about anything important. The weather, whether his knee was better, whether I managed to find good coffee in DC. Small things, real things. When I hung up, I stood at my kitchen window for a while. My apartment faces east, and in the morning the light comes in at an angle that makes the whole room look like something from a different time, soft and amber and unhurried. I'd been in this apartment for 2 years, and I still caught myself surprised by that light some mornings. I thought about the girl I was at 12, telling my father I wanted to be a doctor. I thought about the supply closet on the second floor of a Cleveland hospital. I thought about Marlene's hand over mine at the dinner table, wordless and steady. I thought about the boy from Ohio and his mother's sound, not quite a sob and not quite a laugh. I thought about everything I had built in the silence. Here's what nobody tells you about being the one your family couldn't see. The invisibility teaches you to be your own witness. You learn to watch yourself succeed and say, out loud, in the privacy of your own mind, that was real, that was yours, that mattered. You learn not to need the echo because the original sound is enough. I did not need my father to make a toast about me. I did not need my name at the head of his table or my photograph on his wall. I had spent 11 hours keeping a 4-year-old boy's heart beating, and I had done it with my hands, and those hands were mine. And no one, not my father, not the silence, not any version of the story where I wasn't enough, could reach back through time and change what those hands had done. My coffee got cold while I was standing there. I dumped it and made another cup. Outside, Washington was doing what it does in early spring. Stubborn cold still in the air, but light. That promises something. Magnolias just beginning along the mall. The city shaking itself out of winter. I had a meeting at 9, a case review at 11, a surgery scheduled for Thursday that I'd been thinking about for a week. I put on my coat and picked up my bag and went out the door. The work was waiting. It always was, and for the first time in a very long time, I walked toward it without carrying anything I didn't need.